Thank you for your kind invitation. This is interesting to see the faces of some of you, some of which I know have known from the past. And as you say, this is in the memory of Zebi, of Ozzie Whitehead. I used to always call him Ozzie. I don't know. They didn't say Zebi much when he was in California. And he was also very gracious. I met him on a few trips back to the United States when I was pioneering in Central America. And he was very gracious to me, actually hosted me while I was there, and was never tiring in reporting the events with the Guardian and his pilgrimage. Very special. We'll come back to that later on, if you like, at close to the end of the evening. The subject tonight was a kind of overview of the Baha'i faith. In other words, how do we get a picture of what the Baha'i faith is in a short time? And that's always a challenge because of the immense scope of the Baha'i teachings and the worldwide impact of his revelation. We are going to touch on certain points, and I'm basing this on the elucidation that Shoghi Effendi gave to a United Nations committee, which was considering the role of religions in the Holy Land, and asked the Guardian to state what was the Baha'i faith and what was its relationship to Palestine at that time, and now, of course, Israel. For those of you who are not familiar with the Baha'i history, Shoghi Effendi was the world leader, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, and was the great-grandson of the founder of the faith, Baha'u'llah. In his descriptions to the committee, he right off talks about the faith having been established by Baha'u'llah. First sentence of everything, he comes out with Baha'u'llah's name, which I think is important in when we're describing the faith. We want to say, what is it based on? And of course, it's based on Baha'u'llah's teachings on the scope of his revelation. And he announces that he was born in Persia. That was pre-Iranian days. In the middle of the 19th century, he, as a result of the faith established by Baha'u'llah, I want to read the sentence to you because it's so comprehensive. The faith established by Baha'u'llah was born in Persia about the middle of the 19th century, and has, as a result of the successive banishments of its founder, culminating in his exile to the Turkish penal colony of Akka and his subsequent death and burial in its vicinity, fixed its permanent spiritual center in the Holy Land, and is now in the process of laying the foundations of its world administrative center in the city of Haifa, which is slightly south of Akka. Then to bring to the attention of this distinguished committee, quite a large committee, internationally oriented, he says that there are two things which establish in our minds that the Baha'i faith claims to be a world religion. One, he said, of course, it's the unequivocal assertions of the author of the faith, the revelation, who is I should say, one of the unique ones in history that could pronounce on his own position and role. And then he said that's countered on the other side with the general growth of the Baha'i faith, which in that time had spread to many, many countries in the world and was about to reach out and establish itself, some presence of Baha'is in the remaining territories. Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi's grandfather, had given a divine plan for the spread of the Baha'i faith, for the teachings of Baha'u'llah, and he named 130 territories, countries and territories around the world. And Shoghi Effendi had a plan encouraging Baha'is to settle in all those places. So we have, on the one hand, Baha'u'llah's claims that he has brought a new message from God, and on the other hand, the influence that that's had within 100 and some odd years after he had proclaimed the faith. He states that this world religion is destined to evolve in the course of time into a world-embracing commonwealth. And the advent of this commonwealth will signalize a golden age for mankind, for the human race. And the thing that will characterize this new golden age is recognition of the unity of the human race, the whole human race, all humanity. Also the recognition that it was attaining to its stage of maturity, and that through this establishment, through this maturity, a glorious destiny was unfolding before the human race, in which world-encompassing civilization would be born and flourish. So this is the long-scale vision of what Baha'u'llah has come for. He's come to proclaim the unity of mankind, and that it is the will of our Creator, who is the voice and founder and author of all the great religions of the past, showing that this is a one world faith, one spiritual teaching that's flowing down from our eternal Creator down through the ages. And it's a restatement of the eternal verities of those faiths, plus a larger elaboration of those basic truths than has ever been given in the recorded religious history that we have. Then he points out that the unity that we're coming to, the unity of humanity, that he announces and promises and foreshadows, has been evolving since the days of Adam, through a long religious cycle from Adam himself on right through to the coming of the Baha'i faith. And it went through different stages of social development. It through the inspiration and guidance that came to it through a series of progressive revelations, all from the same God, has brought us to a stage where we can look back on it and see the evolving the family unities established in the very earliest days of the cycle, and moving on to tribal unities, and then to city-states, and finally to the stage of independent nationhood. And now, with the appearance of Baha'u'llah and his proclamation of the meaning of religion in this day, the purpose of God has with his creation, and indeed with his creatures, has arrived, and that is the stage of the recognition of the oneness and wholeness of the human race. And this will require, of course, the voluntary leaguing together of all the nations of the world in a federal vision, in a vision of one mankind, where the representatives of all the different nations and the representatives of science and art, everyone will collaborate in making the plans, applying the steps which will lead us to a full unification. Indeed, the kingdom of God on earth, as has been promised in the past holy books. So from the Baha'i point of view, you suddenly, it's a bit like the first time we looked at the planet from space. We had vision images coming from space, and we looked at this planet, and it just threw the limits of our consciousness outward in all directions. That very exciting prospect of seeing the world as one world, which of course wasn't really conceivable in the earlier stages. I think, pretty much the earth was still flat when Jesus appeared and also when Muhammad appeared. And it's only after that that we've begun to mutually discover among the continents the scope of the globe and all of the people that live on it and how fast the human race is multiplying. So Baha'u'llah says that it's incumbent upon us to reflect on his revelation, to hear his teachings, that he has delivered them in a selfless manner. He himself submitted to being a prisoner. He, of course, was persecuted because of the establishment of the religious systems of the past. They didn't want any competition. And indeed, the new revelations from God, the new religions as they appear because the followers and the leaders of the previous revelation have become superficial or completely misguided in their representations about the previous faith. So it's become important for each religion, for its vested interest, to establish itself as the last religion. In other words, the Jews, that's the end of it, and Christians, that's the end of it, and the Muslims, that's the seal of the prophets, and that's the end of it. And Baha'u'llah points out that all of the messengers of God of the past have confirmed the prior manifestation or appearance of divine guidance in prophets before them, and also have promised the appearance of other prophets in the future, indeed, the reappearance of themselves in some cases. I mean, we might find that a bit odd, but then when you hear Baha'u'llah's explanation that the manifestations of God have a twofold station. One of them is an eternal oneness in which their inner reality is the immediate light manifested by God for the guidance of human creatures through the manifestation himself, so that he becomes the mirror of the central orb of the universe, of the divine essence, sublime and unknowable in himself. And he makes himself known to us through these manifestations. So this is one voice that comes to us. And indeed, the different prophets of God have said this, that they're the return of the past manifestation, or they are even identical with the past manifestation or past prophets of God. And so gradually, from this view that we've taken of the whole planet, we also, from the view of the Baha'i faith, we see a whole range, a whole epic cycle of the appearance of these lights of divine guidance down through the ages, moving us gradually one stage further in the social complexity of mankind until we've reached this moment when indeed we have the mandate from God to move forward with the unification of mankind. As in past revelations, those of you who are familiar with the religious history will recognize that at the appearance of any single one of these prophets, there's been a backlash. There's been a terrific upsurge of persecution against them because they seem to be undoing the social order of the time. And indeed they are. They've come to renew revelation in all of its aspects. One of its aspects has to do with the eternal laws of God, and that they renew those, and they're the same in each religion. The unity of God, the love of God, the eternality of the human soul once it turns to the words of God, the verb of God. And then the other side of it are the social teachings which each prophet brings, which are, he abrogates the ones of the previous cycle or confirms them, and then establishes new guidelines for human behavior and for, indeed, not only our individual ethical constraints and position that we need to adopt, but the guidance for nations through kingship and through the appearance of nationhood around the world. And now he's calling for the leaders of mankind to gather together and consider these points. He wrote to the kings and rulers of mankind from his prison cell and his exile in the Holy Land. Baha'u'llah addressed them all in resounding ways, and when they rejected his message, he said that they had rejected what could have become the most great peace if they'd followed through at that time. But he said now he hopes they will hold to a lesser peace. That would be a political unification of mankind without being directly related in the first stages with any religion. But gradually the influence of the energies, the spiritual forces and energies released by any revelation, mankind begins to come into the fold and understand it and see the reasons for it. And in the case of Baha'u'llah, his teachings are so wise and broad that they now, in many cases, are affirmed by the members of the human race as highly reasonable. I wanted to review one thing before we go on, and that is the fundamental principle that you could understand has been referred to here as the religious truth being relative and not absolute, and that revelation is progressive in its character. It's never ending, it's never begun, and it's never ending. It goes on and on and on, and we're entering into a new cycle of spiritual development. And Baha'u'llah indeed says that his revelation is not the last revelation, but will be succeeded by a long series of revelations, which will develop and enrich this divine civilization which he's foretold. The idea of religious truth being relative and not absolute is an important one, because otherwise we're stuck with the laws and teachings of the past, which don't match the needs of our present hour. Now you would say, well, how can truth be relative and not absolute? Well, again, earlier on, I was mentioning about the earth was not discovered. For Christ to proclaim the oneness of the human race, when the human race was not yet discovered or known, the limits of it, would have been impossible to understand. Now we've come to a stage where we recognize the oneness of the globe and of all the continents, and this idea can be broached and considered and weighed and understood. Who knows if in some distant future we have a relationship with some other planet in the universe, now that we're broaching the idea that they may be inhabited, some of them may be inhabited, and so on. So this is not the time for laws relating these two worlds to each other. That's a relative truth for the future, so to speak. But the time we're living in needs a clear declaration of truths as we can understand them in the situation that the world is presently facing. With regard to progressive revelation, Shoghi Effendi summarizes this. He says, that there, and this turns out to be 9 aspects related to this, that religious truth is not absolute but relative, which we've discussed briefly here, that the divine revelation is a continuous and progressive process, that all the great religions of the world are divine in origin, that their basic principles are in complete harmony, their aims and purposes are one and the same, their teachings are but facets of one truth, that their functions are complementary, and that they differ only in the non-essential aspects of their doctrines, and that their missions represent successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society. Is such a thing as spiritual evolution of human society, and that's been clearly identified in the Baha'i teachings. And of course, the evidence and proof of this is in the scriptures of the past religions, all of which he's telling us are in complete harmony. The principles of them are in complete harmony. The food laws may differ because of certain circumstances. The marriage laws and things of that sort may differ. The type of obligatory prayers we may be called upon to recite changes. These things are the outer circumstance, the clothing, if you will, of the outside of the truth of divine revelations. And they will change again in the future. But the eternal teachings remain to inspire us. Now I wanted to go briefly into some of the basic Baha'i teachings. This will give you a kind of an overview of the beliefs of the Baha'is as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah and elaborated by his son Abdul Baha. So the Baha'i faith upholds the unity of God. There's only one God. Recognizes the unity of his prophets. They're all linked together internally, spiritually. It inculcates the principle of the oneness and wholeness of the entire human race. It proclaims the necessity and the inevitability of the unification of mankind. This is coming. We see now how interdependent we are, how much we need international collaboration with the present crisis of the pandemic. More and more different aspects of the world are demonstrating that to us. He asserts that this unification is gradually approaching, and these various stages, it doesn't all happen at once, but it's coming about. He claims that nothing short of the transmuting spirit of God working through his chosen mouthpiece in this day can ultimately succeed in bringing it about. We need the guidance of a new revelation to move from stage to stage in the social evolution of mankind. It enjoins upon its followers the primary duty of an unfettered search after truth. It condemns all manners of prejudice and superstition. That would cover the whole gamut of political, racial, ethical, religious, all the prejudices that we store and are really based on false information. Once we get a clarification of things, they begin to fall, these prejudices begin to fall away. And very needed now with the coming recognition of the oneness and wholeness of the human race. Abdul Baha declares that we are all the flowers of one garden. We may be different color, different shapes, different fragrances, but just as in a garden, that adds to the harmony and beauty of the garden. So the mixing of the races of mankind, the interchange that's taking place now with all of the movement of refugees and things, which is also driving the unification of mankind because it puts us in touch with people that we didn't know anything about, and gradually we need to learn how to live with them, live with each other. So it declares that the purpose of religion is the promotion of amity and concord amongst human souls. And it proclaims that religion is in essential harmony with science. Science is another aspect of truth. In the Baha'i teaching, it says that God has revealed two books. The book of Revelation, which is the book that the prophets of God are delivering us to in progressive stages. And also then the other book, he says, is the book of creation, the open tablet of existence, because God is the creator and maintainer and sustainer of all the physical reality that we have around us, the material reality we have around us. And all of these various aspects of creation have truths related to them. They involve secrets to be discovered, as we're doing through our scientific research and experimentation. And likewise, the book of Revelation contains mysteries and secrets. And Abdu'l-Baha says that through the study of science and the physical creation, we come to understand better the truths of the book of Revelation, because the book of Revelation is full of science talking about likenesses, comparisons with physical reality, because that's the reality we have in front of us and from which we're learning how to recognize reality, how to penetrate truth. And so he says, the more you study the book of Revelation, the more you appreciate the book of creation, and the more you study the creation, it also said they interact with each other, and he says they're in complete harmony. We will come to find how complete is the harmony between divine truths and physical realities. He says that we should recognize religion as the foremost agency for the pacification and the orderly progress of human society. This seems to contradict everything we know about religion, the outer religious history in the past centuries. There's been so much strife and the basis of war and misunderstanding. It's because it has been misused, misunderstood, misinterpreted, and aspects of it have been taken over by leadership with very poor motives, very base motives. So we have to rescue. We have to have a clear enunciation of what actually is religion. This force that comes from God from age to age to draw us back into a singularity of vision, enable us to go forward as a human race. And this then leads to the pacification and the orderly progress of human society. The faith also, Baha'u'llah's teachings, maintain the principle of equal rights, opportunities, and privileges for men and women. This is a great new stage in the development of religious teachings. So the first of the manifestations, which is so clearly set forth, equal rights and opportunities for men and women. And to such a degree that with respect to education, he says, if you're in a family and you can't educate, you don't have the means to educate your sons and your daughters, you should educate first your daughters, because your daughters become the first teachers of the next generations. So that's quite a change and contrast in that. And now, of course, women are entering into every aspect of human life and certainly capable of acting at any level. Baha'u'llah insists on compulsory education. He says he doesn't have the means or the way to enforce that, but he calls upon the leaders of mankind to consider the education and to promote a universal curriculum, which will put us all on one basis. And it suggests the adoption of a universal tongue so that we can all speak the same language. And very quickly, in 1 or 2 generations, we'll have the arts and sciences and everything in this world language. We have to drop our own language in the meanwhile, but we do need something that facilitates our mutual understanding. He said that we need to, humanity needs to take measures to limit the extremes of poverty and wealth. They've become too far extreme. No one should be suffering so that they don't have enough to eat and shelter. And likewise, humanity may need to consider some limit to the levels of individual wealth that can be accumulated by private parties as part of the reorganization of mankind. He abolishes the institution of priesthood. He said, we've come to an age where we each should investigate religious truth from the books of God. We now have the ability to have the books printed. We have the ability to read them. We can read the past scriptures, come to our own understanding. We can read for our whole area of science and all the physical sciences we can look at. And that we don't need priests anymore. They've been the cause of confusion in the past. So he also provides then a program to how to organize our religious life through a series of elected representatives of the Baha'i community. Wherever there is a community of Baha'is, they elect a local assembly, and then the local assemblies in a country elect annually a national spiritual assembly. And finally, there's a international world body at the head of the Baha'i faith called the Universal House of Justice. And it sits in the Holy Land in Israel. He prohibits slavery. This is the first pronouncement. Slavery has existed, for centuries, but this is the first pronouncement in Scripture itself that it's abolished. It's to be eliminated entirely. Also asceticism, mendicancy, and monasticism. So these things reach on beyond the limits of how humans should behave, and we have to provide for means so we don't have to have people begging in the streets, so on, or living in isolation from others to gain spirituality. He says we should gain spirituality through service to each other, through service to the human race. He prescribes monogamy. The faith prescribes monogamy. It discourages divorce. It emphasizes the necessity of strict obedience to one's government. We're not anarchists. We follow the laws of the land. We try to uplift the spirit and outlook of the people wherever we live through the sharing of these teachings. He's exalted work as performed in the spirit of service to the level of worship. In other words, in the sight of our Creator, if we're selflessly serving others through our employment, through our services, through our discoveries, that is considered also worship. Of course, he establishes a program of worship. He prescribes prayers which will assist us to develop spiritually and reflect the qualities of God so that we might aspire after the ideal of being created in the image and likeness of God. Finally, he delineates the outlines of those institutions that must establish and perpetuate the general peace of mankind. One of his fundamental teachings is universal peace. How to attain to it is very important function the human race has to look and discover and establish those institutions and agencies which will protect us. And he provides a scheme for that in his teachings as well. The faith is based on the appearance and teachings of three central figures. Baha'u'llah, who was the founder of the faith himself, was preceded by a religious figure entitled the Bab, which means the gate from the east in which the glory of the Lord entered the world. These are all religious references. And many people have now abandoned religion altogether. It's because the situation of religion became so bad that, and the efforts of atheists to deny the very existence of a creator, although it seems quite irrational how one could imagine that all this would come to exist without a maker, without a designer, without an intelligence behind such a complexity of a universe. The Bab appeared several years before Baha'u'llah and announced that he was one of the in the line of these great prophetic beings, and he stirred the country with his spiritual teachings to such a degree that the whole country was in a revolution of spiritual thought and so on. And this greatly upset the ruler of the country and also the Shahs of that time, and also the religious clergy, the Shia Islamic clergy, and they began to persecute and eradicate the followers of the Bab. And they finally publicly executed the Bab himself, calling upon a regiment of 750 riflemen to shoot him. Now you can imagine how important they thought he was, that should have that many people needed to wipe him out, to kill him. He was a glorious being. His teachings are now beginning to be translated and promulgated. And besides the explanations he gave of past holy books and past scriptures, he also announced the coming of one greater than him. And it was after some years, Baha'u'llah made his appearance, and he later identified himself with this promised one of the Bab. And they had been in communication in their lifetimes. And Baha'u'llah had served as a disciple of the Bab for a time. Then Baha'u'llah was in the Holy Land, was in exile in the Holy Land, and he passed away there in 1892. And he appointed his eldest son, known in the world as Abdul Baha, to be his successor and the implementer and the interpreter of his teachings. And Abdul Baha, who had been a prisoner with Baha'u'llah at the time of the Young Turks Revolution, all the religious and political prisoners of the state were released. And Abdul Baha was then free to be able to travel to the West. And he traveled to Africa, to Egypt, and from there, after a time, diffusing the Baha'i teachings there, he went on to Europe and spoke in all the great capitals and addressed many leaders of thought, and his talks in Europe. And then eventually he traveled to America, traveled across America in a 9-month trip, and established many Baha'i fundamentals in his conversations, in his talks to the public. I think it's been estimated some 90,000 people heard his talks in 1912. 1911, 1912, and 1913 were the years of his travel. And when he passed away in 1921, after the Great War, the First War, World War, he left the faith in the hands of his grandson, who became the guardian of the faith, and that's Shoghi Effendi, and it's from his summary of the Baha'i teachings that we're talking with you today. How are we doing on time? I'm sorry, goodness. Very interesting giving talks to a group of people you can't see.
It's 8:48. It's fine, Mr. Dunbar. Sorry, Teresa.
Okay, that's good. I think maybe, you know, I've teased you enough by all these things. If some of you are not familiar with them, you would like to raise some questions. I'm sure that perhaps I can answer some of it, and then there are very capable people here, the other hosts and things that can help too. Nice to visit with you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. That was a beautiful summary of all of the things that we all have heard and sometimes forget, and a beautiful expression of the collection of treasures within the Baha'i faith that are expression of God's will for humanity in this age. So if there are any people who have not been familiar with the Baha'i faith in the past, maybe we could start with questions from those people.
Greetings. Dear Mr. Dunbar, you mentioned about 2 books that are open, Book of Creation and Book of Revelation. I am wondering if I could ask for a little more elaboration on that.
There is, of course, some references. The quotes that I'm basing this on are translated by Mr. Nakshawani for his daughter in her book Response, and that's where these quotations, the different elements that I mentioned are there. But also you find the references earlier to the Book of Revelation, but also not always connected with the Book of Creation, but that's also mentioned. The Open Tablet of Existence is another translation of the Book of Creation. If you look at the titles of those various designations which refer to the material universe, to the outer universe itself, I hope we may have more teachings about that. I know there's a volume being prepared of the tablets, the best known tablets of Abdul-Baha, which will be published in the future. And some of those tablets may have references to these subjects as well.
Thank you very much. So if I may, Teresa, would you mind if I read the question from Lena Booth Owen on the chat? It says, sorry, my mic doesn't work. I'm not a Baha'i, and this is my first time in this forum. Can I ask, and this is my first, can I ask one question? Why is this faith so not well known? The teachings seem to make a lot of sense. Can you also explain how Baha'is view the idea of salvation and heaven? I was brought up as Christian. Thank you for making this beautiful faith known. More people should hear about this. So thank you, Lena. I don't know where you are, but I'll hand it over to Teresa and Mr. Dunbar to answer.
That's a lovely question. Mr. Dunbar?
Yes, no, that's beautiful. I wish I could tell you. I think it's much better known. It has been much better known. It comes and goes. You know, humanity has grown so much, multiplied since the appearance of Baha'u'llah and since the time Abdu'l-Baha spoke across the European and North American continents. The Baha'is also have spread out, and many people know about the Baha'i faith. Many have not reacted to it. Some have arisen and persecuted it. There are those that would like it to have it disappear. It doesn't disappear. But when you think of Christianity, what's the impact of Christ, the actions, the wonders of his mission, his revelation? 300 years before it kind of came out in the open. You know, it takes time. And Baha'u'llah has, Shoghi Effendi said, Baha'u'llah has given a respite to mankind for 100 years to hear about his faith. And that ended in 77, 78. And now we're outside the respite, and we're starting to see a general deterioration of the conditions of mankind. It's moving towards the death of religion altogether, that people, it's considered, you're considered backward and stupid and retrograde if you believe in God and any faith at all. And this is part of this materialistic cancer, which is eating away at the vitals of the human race. Shoghi Effendi told us it will continue until it destroys us. It's going to destroy the old world order. It's going to destroy this order that's based on godlessness, that's based on not including religion in school, that all the different things, most of this is based because of the corruption of the religions, that we've reacted this way and rejected them. So we're in for a period of severe suffering and further deterioration of the elements of the human race. We have raised up 3 false gods and placed them on the altar of our consciousness. One is nationalism, Shoghi Effendi said, and then racism, and then communism. And these 3 things we're experimenting with in different ways. And it's clear from the Baha'i teachings that anyone that exclaims and promotes and pursues the domination of one nation over other nations, or the preeminence of one race over another race, or the exaltation of one social class over other social classes, they are going to reap the wrath of God, because he's proclaimed the oneness of mankind, and that's the opposite of everything they're doing. So as they do their experiments, because we are given free will in this world and can do basically what we want, but we pay the consequences. So we see these things, and you say, how can God let children suffer? For God's sake, it's not God that's letting children suffer, it's you and me. It's our approach to how human life should be organized. It's all the extremes that move off of the path of moderation and balanced behavior that this whole scheme of Baha'u'llah calls for. So to the degree that we disobey those things, even we don't know the source yet, will we have consequences? And also it will create in us a consciousness, a reaching out for reality. And Shoghi Effendi said it will eventually bring the human race to the desire for Baha'u'llah's teachings, and they will become clear, established. Then they will be also persecuted as they become more and more known, the faith will be more persecuted. But it's a process, and it's on its way, and we're in the middle of a part of the very difficult stage of it right now with the strange political circumstances we're living in and the pandemic which surrounds us.
Thank you. Teresa, if I might just come in there for a minute, because Marian Murray, who says, I'm not a Baha'i either, and she's responding to Lina Booth Owen, and she says numerically it's much smaller than the major faiths, but it's one of the fastest growing religions. So that's from Marian Murray. I mean, Marian, I don't know where you are. If you want to show yourself, it'd be great instead of me reading out for you. Sorry, I'll hand over to you, Teresa.
Yes, I read that too. I found my chat, and I was thinking that it might be good to interject here that, some of the other religions have had more centuries to get their feet on the ground. But one of the reasons why the Baha'i faith is so fast growing is because of the appeal, because it's such an antidote for these 3 problems that we're seeing right now with racism and nationalism and so forth. And that the reason we're growing fast, but not exponentially fast, is because we teach, but we don't proselytize. And that might be a difference between the Baha'i faith and some other faiths. I see lots of new hands up. I see Amir. Amir, do you have a question?
Could I say something here?
Sure.
might not be terribly popular, but there are a number of Baha'is that are present on this. And when Shoghi Effendi was saying that the people who don't hear about the faith when they go to the next world, because there was this question about life after death and salvation, if you haven't heard about the Baha'i faith, then okay, you hear about it in the next world. But if you haven't heard about it here, then you're not responsible. But Shoghi Effendi said the Baha'is are responsible because they don't speak up and talk about the faith. And he raised this question of proselytization. There's a terrible confusion about proselytization. Anyone who talks about religion is said they're proselytizing. You shouldn't talk about religion. What's the point? I mean, we have a new revelation. It's a new message from God. It has to be proclaimed and understood by the people what it is. All right, you need a listener in that case. But if you're not willing to state clearly what it is, and that's not proselytizing, that's spreading information, sharing information, teaching the faith itself. Proselytization means forcing people, constraining them to follow a faith, or luring them with the prospects of money or financial or material benefits, or college for your son or daughter, and the protection that the church will offer you or that your congregation will give to you. All of that kind of thing. I don't know why announcing the existence of a new faith, a new message from God, which is the remedy for all the problems the human race is facing, should be considered proselytization.
Thank you. I think that's a very, very helpful distinction for people. And we are familiar with some of the ways in which colonialism has given the word proselytization certain meanings. And I think some of us extend the definition too far in our own shyness to share information about the Baha'i faith. So that's probably a very good, very helpful insight for people to hear. So thank you very much for that. Okay, are we ready for the next question? Amir.
Hi everybody. I'm new to the Baha'i faith, just a very beginner, and my background is Jewish. I was born in Jerusalem, 6th generation Jerusalem, and now living in Canada. And I got 2 or 3 questions. I'll ask 2 of them for now. My first question is, it says that that the Baha'i faith believe in the different prophets throughout the evolution, and I'm just wondering that within the Jewish within the Bible, there are many prophets throughout the centuries that were providing their prophets in the Bible, such as Yirmiyahu, Yoshayahu, and many of them. I wonder if the Baha'i faith believed not only in Moses but all the those others. And my second question is something that I've raised before, and so these days in Israel, now they have a lockdown, and religious people find themselves praying with their families rather than in synagogues. Where in synagogue they are separate, the men and the women are separate and have to pray in separate chambers. And now they're praying together as families, and women find themselves in much better state and better spiritual feeling, where they are praying with their sons and daughters and husbands. So my question is, and I so much like the idea that the Baha'i faith is saying that the truth is a dynamic and evolving truth, And then the question is whether there is going to be any thinking of changing the membership of the Universal House of Justice to include women in it, because I believe that when Baha'u'llah made his thoughts, he said in the future it will be revealed, but I think we are already in that future, and we know that women should be participating in all aspects of life, and they should be there in this. That's just my personal opinion.
Yes, so about the prophets, certainly in the line of major prophets that Baha'u'llah speaks about in the Igan, in the Kitab Igan, the Book of Certitude, he refers to Moses, and he refers to Abraham quite clearly, and Noah. And then Abdu'l-Baha, in explaining this, he said these are what he calls prophets endowed with constancy. That is, they reveal a book, they reveal laws. And then he said, under their shadow appear other prophets of God, which are dependent on their teachings. So in other words, the lesser prophets of the house of Israel are all recognized as prophets, in fact, of having prophetic character. That is, they partake of this universal reality that the manifestation has that human beings don't have. The manifestation has a vision of truth and reality that is given to him by God. He's the mouthpiece of God, the speaker of God amongst men. Yes. So those prophets are recognized and certainly affirmed and celebrated in the Baha'i writings. And there also were some of the previous ones, again, like Noah. And then there have been a series of prophets amongst the Arabs too. They had their own line. And those were considered true too, like Hud and Saleh. And you see them mentioned in some of the other ones that are mentioned in the Quran, because the Baha'is also bear witness to the authenticity and divinity of Muhammad's mission, as much as some of that is deteriorated in the meanwhile as well. So those are the question of the prophets. And now about the women on the House of Justice, this is a matter that the House of Justice has considered. I'm sure it will continue to consider. It's constrained very strongly by the references to men of the House of Justice in Baha'u'llah's writings, and then also to Abdu'l-Baha explaining that the House of Justice, the Supreme House of Justice, not the national houses of justice and local houses of justice, but the Supreme one, its membership is limited to men. I was talking to my colleagues about that. They said, this is a mercy to women because we were so burdened down. The House has such immense tasks and responsibilities before it. And Abdu'l-Baha was asked this, and he said that this is not clear at the moment. In other words, he recognized also as a challenge in the appearance of the teachings in this, but he said, ere long, it will become as clear as the sun at midday why women are not on the House of Justice. So anything we can think up, it's not known, he says now, but it will become known in the future. So some people will say, oh, it's because they have their cycles and childbirth and so on and so on. None of this is affirmed in the teachings, so we don't know yet. But we'll have to come to know, and maybe at that time there'll be some further understanding. What you should know is that in the ranks of the faith, there have been a number of Western women who outrank the House of Justice individually, the House Justice members. That is the hands of the cause of God. They're outstanding, and the House recognized that the station of the individual hands of the cause of God is greater than the station of the House of Justice individual members. So it's not that it's in that sense, the women have been recognized at another level in another stage of the cause. And now our outstanding women are, a woman represents us at the United Nations and so many other capacities on the International Teaching Center. There's a number of outstanding women serving the interests of the faith. But I can't tell you how long we have to wait till this clear as the sun at noon will become manifest, but that's a promise of Abdu'l-Baha in his writings.
Thank you. I hope that clarification was helpful. These are very good and very deep questions. So great discussion. We have about 8 people waiting in line with their hands up. I think the next one was Nazanin and Wolfgang.
There is a, sorry, before that, before we go on to Nazanin, there was 2 questions that our dear friend whose first time it was to come from a Christian background asked, and that was in relation to the Baha'i teachings on heaven and salvation. I think people are asking that on the chat again. Maybe Mr. Dunbar would like to just say a few words on those.
Yes, I could mention that since the revelations are progressive in nature, Abdu'l-Baha puts the standard for faith very high now. He says that it's not possible to say you believe in one of these messengers and not in the others without demonstrating a certain limitation in the scope of your vision and understanding. Since the light of these lamps of God that have been sent into the world is always the same light, if you have truly recognized, if you're a true, sincere believer in one of them, you should readily recognize the words and the voice of them in another dispensation, in another teaching. And so he calls the Baha'is, he said, you have to recognize and make no distinction between the spiritual reality of all of the messengers of God, including Baha'u'llah himself. But at their individual level, they have specific missions, and they proclaim the faith according to the needs and requirements of the age in which they appear. And so they bring social teachings that are in accordance with the exigencies of the time they appear in. And that's what's happened with these teachings that I was attempting to review here in the brief talk that we had. Now, it gets even more serious than that, because if you have heard of the faith and rejected it, that places you in a difficult position entering the next world. The mercy of God encompasses all. But one of the things that Baha'u'llah repeats over and over in his holy book is fear God. And he said, fear God the most merciful. He is the most merciful, but we have to understand what he's saying. Now, sometimes you find it so inconvenient. I'm in one faith and I have my traditions and my family, and everybody's going to be upset recognizing a new manifestation. Can you imagine how the Christians, the people who became Christ followers, how they were rejected by the Jewish people and the difficulties that entailed, and how also the question of Christians and the Jews with respect to the Quran declares that they're people of the book and they should be respected. But they are also called to recognize the new message that's come. So Baha'u'llah says that the truth is that if you deny any of the manifestations of God, you've denied them all. And that becomes very difficult. I know it's a hard situation, especially for the Jews. They're about 4 dispensations behind. And it doesn't lessen the truth and reality and beauty of Judaism. sometimes we hear even Baha'is say, well, all religions are one. If you follow any religion sincerely and faithfully, that's fine. We're happy with that. But that's not the Baha'i teachings. Baha'u'llah calls us all to recognize all of them and to recognize him and to bring ourselves in line with the word of God in the age that we live in. Now, this is a tough challenge, and this is the day of resurrection. Whether you're going to arrive out of the grave of your past and negligent beliefs, or you're going to arise into the heaven of new faith and understanding and vision and move forward with the purpose of God in the day that you live. So this is very challenging, tough stuff. I can't say what happens to you in the next world. Shoghi Effendi says you can't say how God is going to judge, but certainly the recognition of the messenger of God in your day, and as opposed to the direction of the denial of him, becomes a very critical point as you enter the next world. Now, I think that if I understand correctly, there are punishments and difficulties in the next world which are not meant as retribution or destruction of the soul, but rather a means for its reformation, a means of perhaps having it turn to the light. It's seen the light, but it doesn't like the light because it's not used to that, and that has some other idea in his head, or her head, whatever. So it's a challenge, and we have to be gentle in that, but at the same time, there is a certain standard of truth that needs to be recognized.
Mr. Dunbar, I'd like to interject here. Liz Coleman posted, surely if they have heard the spirit of the faith, they will not be able to reject it. Is there not a responsibility on the conveyor too? So, that's a tough question. What do you think about how the message is presented to them versus their ability to instantly recognize the truthfulness of it?
Yes, that's very important, and it puts the spotlight back on us as Baha'is. What are we doing, But Baha'u'llah says, if you arise to proclaim my faith with sincerity, that the divine confirmations of the Holy Spirit, or the divine spirit as it's called in this day, will confirm you so that your words will penetrate and touch the hearts of your listeners. And it's important that the Baha'is are aware of that and pray for that, so that when they're teaching, the divine confirmations can flow through them. It's not limited to the knowledge of the Baha'is, although that certainly we're all called on to study the faith and absorb the faith and be able to reflect it faithfully when we're talking about it. But we will be inspired in our attitudes if we have the right spirit. I know there was a fellow who heard about the faith in Bluefields, a young man, and without the advantages of any education. And he heard the faith, and he saw the Baha'is. There were several pioneers that were there, women and men. And he became so excited about it. And he said, I have to go and tell my friends about this. So he went out and he said, I told my friends, I said, there's a new religion. And they said, oh, what's the name? And he said, well, I can't remember the name. And who's the prophet? Who's the founder of it? And he said, I can't remember the name of it, but it's wonderful and it's full of light. And I can take you to talk to the people that can tell you about it. And that was the way he taught the faith from the beginning, with no knowledge basically of anything. Dr. Muhajir said the Mentawai Island people who'd converted to the cause in Indonesia, that he had taught the faith to. The government census came and asked the village, what religion are you, or so on, or presumed they were Muslims, and said, how many Muslims are here? And they said, no, we're not Muslims. They said, what are you? He said, we're doctor's religion. And he said they asked him who was Doctor's prophet, and they couldn't remember the name of Baha'u'llah. It hadn't been visited a second time, but they still remembered the spirit with which they had embraced hearing what he had to say. The sheep know the voice of the shepherd, and when it is raised again, they recognize it.
Yeah. We're getting some comments to that effect in the chat. People who came from another faith, the Jewish faith or the Christian faith, and who instantly recognized the message. So that's a point well taken. We have quite a few hands up. So if you don't mind, I think we'll go on to the next one. I think we had stopped at Nazanin in Germany. Anybody there?
You need to
Yes.
unmute yourself.
Yeah,
There you are.
okay.
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. Okay, thanks. Yeah, Wolfgang, my name. My question is about, we are having here some kind of campaign, or how you call it, by putting Baha'i quotations in a newspaper regularly on a weekly base. Now, the point came up, some said that it would be the most important to bring these thoughts over, and it might be a hindrance for people who are not familiar to the faith at all to see names like Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. So better leave them away to begin with. On the other hand, you said that when Shoghi Effendi started talking about the faith, right away he mentioned Baha'u'llah, the name, and then continued. So what would be a good advice on that?
Well, I think it's a good subject for consultation of your local assembly and consideration. Oftentimes, and this quite legitimately through the National Assembly here and through other local assemblies, quotations are published in the newspaper, and it says from the Baha'i writings. You don't necessarily have to put the names of the founders. Now, if if you have an audience and you're talking to them and they can ask you and you can explain further, then I think it's useful to use the name of Baha'u'llah and Baha'i. This Shoghi Effendi said there is a place waiting in the human soul to hear these names, and they lock into it when they hear it, and it begins to feed them, and they have sometimes a long time. They have to hear the name somewhere else, and then they find out they have a cousin who's a Baha'i, and then they find out that they were Romanian background, and the Queen of Marie was a follower of his Baha'u'llah's teachings. All of these things. So it's there's not one answer to that question, I think, but it's wise to bring it up that yes, there's certainly the names of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha without any further explanation may be a test for some or people or not. But I think it's the name of Baha'u'llah is becoming, when you associate it with a very sound quotation of some sort, it looks like, Aristotle, or you're quoting someone else, and people begin to accept it, but they perhaps need to have heard it before that it becomes that easy.
Thank you. Good explanation. It's hard to choose the order of these next questions. Martin Lockwood has a question. We also have a question about heaven and the afterlife. Then we have David Williams and Jesus. So I think in that order, let's see if those people are still have their question or if it's already been covered. Martin Lockwood.
Can you hear me? No? I'm sorry.
Yes, we can hear you, Martin.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well done. Good. Well, first of all, to everybody, greetings from Gloucestershire here on the unfashionable eastern side of the Atlantic, and very interesting talk from Mr. Dunbar. And But I've just looked up his bio. He's been, you've walked on this earth for a long time. Congratulations. And but you've done a lot for the faith. And in your illustrious life, is there a point, particularly for those of us who would like to make a difference to this world, that you did something or something happened and you could say to yourself, yes, I made a difference there? May I invite you to tell us a little bit about one thing that you did where you thought, yes, I've made a difference here. I invite you.
Thank you. Nothing occurs to me. When I was packing papers in the Holy Land, getting ready to leave after retirement, I found in a document a tablet from Abdu'l-Baha. And in that tablet, it had a singular verse which struck me right between the eyes. It said that the service of the friends belongs to God, not to them. So the best we can hope is if we've somehow been vehicles or instruments for the communication of that which came from God and went to the hearts of the individuals. Shoghi Effendi says you must all depend on these divine confirmations when teaching. That without divine confirmations, the hearts will not be touched and the faith will not penetrate. This is very serious. We have to be praying and asking for confirmations in our teaching work when we're talking about the faith. And I think it's interesting for those who are not yet Baha'is or become interested in the faith to hear this. It's quite Shoghi Effendi's translation from the Master's Will and Testament said that the greatest gift of God is the gift of teaching. Because in teaching, you become an instrument of divine confirmations, and it's through those divine confirmations that you grow spiritually. And Abdu'l-Baha is quite clear. He says, if you're not delivering the message, you're not the channel of divine confirmations. Because in this time that we're in, as the person that said, why isn't this better known, can tell us, that's the most important thing to do, is to deliver the message. And we have many collective responsibilities under the plans, under the marvelous 5-year plans of the House of Justice, and we have the need to participate in these collective activities. But outside of that, as an individual, we stand in relationship to the manifestation. He says, the duty of each one is to proclaim my cause and deliver the message to different people. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big thing. It may be just the simple, what we're talking about like tonight, where we say that, have you heard of the Baha'i teachings as written by Baha'u'llah, as revealed by Baha'u'llah? The Baha'is believe that he's a new messenger of God. He's proclaimed that, and he brings solutions for the problems of the human race for the time we live in. Have you heard of that? And then people say, no, but I'm not interested in religion, or no, I'm so glad you found something that you like. Good night. Now, this is the stage, so we need to proclaim it. Then he says, if they show interest, teach them. We're not teaching them from the beginning. We're announcing the existence of such a thing. We're telling them there is something here, and it's come to the world. I've heard of it before you, but I'm telling you about it. So you can decide what you're going to do about it. It's the spirit of sharing the cause. Let's see.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we had David next. David Williams.
Yes, hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And actually, this was a question that really is kind of stems from conversations I have with my wife, who is not a Baha'i. But I thought there was just a very 30-second story about Mr. Dunbar that it was just so impactful to her. We were at a conference, and we were at a hotel, and we were going over to the temple, and Mr. Dunbar had missed the bus. And he was there in the lobby, and he was saying, well, I need to get over there because I had gone out to get in my car, and my wife, who's not a Baha'i, who doesn't know Mr. Dunbar, and she just says, well, there's this nice guy, and we'll take you. And the net is so we had when I drive up, Mr. Dunbar. So we had a personal audience of conversations and stories that you shared, and thank you so much for that. But when we got to the temple, and all the barricades are up, and then we're driving up, and we want to get you up to the door, and they say, no, you turn around, go back, you can't go. Oh, that's Mr. Dunbar. Oh, move the barricades, let us go in. And we got front stage, and just thank you so much for that. But here's the question that I wanted to share. That was just so powerful, and you made such an impact on her, and she's here in the background and embarrassed, which is why I'm asking the question instead of her. And that is, she's a Christian and has for so many years been raised to appreciate and love Jesus Christ as her personal savior, and has him elevated to such a degree. And then here we're having discussions that are really bringing up these other prophets that are going to be kind of synonymous in the context of spiritual truths. And it's very difficult for someone like that. And though you answered this question saying we have to embrace all the religions as one, and all of these manifestations as messages as one, the question is, how do you really reconcile when you've been taught this exclusivity of only one way, and then you're elevating or like almost demotion of Jesus Christ to come down to be like on the level of Moses, or demoting to come down to the level of Muhammad or Krishna or Buddha. And I just would like to hear you, maybe give a description of how that is reconciled in the mind of someone who elevates Jesus so much.
Well, we're so blessed because we have these clear demonstrations and proofs from the words of Baha'u'llah about this inner reality, the manifestation of God. The circumstances of their outer lives, they've been reported to us oftentimes with immense prejudices, because people are protecting the birthright of being either Christian or Jewish or Muslim, whatever, those are being the basic ones in the West. I usually say, I don't say it in public talks, but this is a venue I think we could say that I would urge her to pray very sincerely and address the message to Christ. The reality of Christ hasn't gone anywhere. That's the reality we're talking about. Ask Jesus, what is this? Does it have a meaning? Should I be paying attention? Guide me in this, I beg of you. Don't leave me unguided in this. If you go and ask the pastor in the church, he'll tell you this is the way of the devil. But this is biased self-interest of the people. Now, if they look a little bit at Baha'u'llah's words, and your wife surely has done that, she can recognize the parallel character of this. There are certain things, taught in the Bible, which are taught for the time they appeared in. Christ himself said that he has brought truth to them, but he said it's not all truth. In the future, the Spirit of truth will come, and he will teach you everything that I haven't taught you. And Baha'u'llah comes and he says, I am that Spirit of truth that you are promised by Jesus. And I've appeared, I am the Son appeared in the glory of the Father. I am the Prince of Peace. I am the everlasting Father, mentioned in Isaiah. Well, these are very powerful claims. Now you want to ask Jesus to enlighten you, either speak to you or give you a dream or some sign, some indication that will free you from the constraints that you have because of inherited religion, inherited faith. We have inherited faith, Abdu'l-Baha says, but we also have a spontaneous faith that's based on our own understanding of things rather than that which has been passed to us, and that we've borrowed from past understandings of people who may not have a complete understanding of the subject, may be quite sincere, but not have a complete understanding. So I hope that you'll find a way to commune with your Lord Jesus and with our Lord Jesus, because we identify with him too. I felt I became a much better Christian when I became a Baha'i, because I saw from Baha'u'llah's writings, I saw the exalted character of the Messiah and of his coming.
What a
Thank you so
beautiful,
much.
beautiful response. Beautiful response. I hope that was helpful. Was that helpful?
Absolutely. My wife
Thank
is saying
you.
thank you so much.
I just want to tell you and your wife, this is exactly what I did. And I got the answer from Christ that I needed, because I said, these words cannot not be the word of God, but Jesus will never forgive me if I'm wrong. And I got a very forgiving message, and probably anybody who was a former Christian in the room, probably in the Zoom room, probably has had that experience. So yeah, good advice, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you. Well, we'll try to get to everyone. What about Jesus? Do you still have your hand up?
Yes, I'm still here. I
Okay.
also like to share that I came from the Christian faith, and I was very worried about salvation too. And when I first heard about this beautiful Baha'i faith, it all appeals to me. But I was also trapped in the names and the explanations of how Jesus was supposed to come. So the words were getting to my heart, but I didn't know how to reconcile. And I did exactly how Mr. Dunbar said. One time I pray until I think past like 3 o'clock in the morning. And when my heart was exhausted of praying, I turned to the Lord Christ and I said, you have to reveal to me, you have to tell me if this is the truth, because it feels like the truth to me. It is like you are looking at a light and you cannot deny it, because every verse that I read, that I was reading of the Baha'i faith at the time, everything resounds true. I knew that it was the truth, but the veils and the how it has been explained to me, I could not reconcile that. And it was like a big storm in my soul. After praying many hours that night, somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, I just felt an immense peace in my heart. That was the confirmation. And I said, okay, I think I got it. My mind is tired of asking the questions. I feel that all of this is truth. Why will I not take it? And that was my salvation. Now that people were talking about salvation, that's what it meant, because it means the knowledge of God that illumines our inner being. And when I recognize that great teaching, for which I can see you all as my brothers, the ones that are in India and all over North America and Europe, you are all my brothers, and I was longing for that. I could not reconcile when I was going to my local church why only me and my church was going to be saved. And I kept asking the pastor, what about the other people that don't come to our church? And there were no answers, because they couldn't give answers to that. But the answer is this teaching of oneness of humanity. The oneness is recognizing that nobility, that we are divine, like in the hidden word Baha'u'llah has taught us, when he said that he has breath, his own breath into us. And that is the most beautiful teaching that I take from Baha'i faith, I think. This oneness, this unity of humanity, because recognizing that there is that divine in each one of us, now I can see each human being, each one of you, and each person I see anywhere in the world, I recognize as divine. And that way, there is no barriers. And that way, it has led me to embrace, to, I don't even look whether it's woman or man, whether it's black or white, whether it's American or, that doesn't matter, because all the barriers fall. And that's all I can ask you. All of us do that, that we look at the nobility of the divine in every human being, and all the prejudice and all the barriers fell. And that way we can embrace all humanity as our brothers and sisters and build this beautiful world order for which we are striving.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for that story. Mr. Dunbar, how are you doing? Are you getting tired?
No, I'm all right. Go ahead.
You sure? Okay. These stories are so beautiful. We're getting so much activity both online and in the toolbar here. Somebody says that her grandfather, who was a Jew, became a Baha'i. Oh, he was a Jew and became a Baha'i, and only then recognized the divinity of Christ. So lots of confirmation for this concept. Okay, let's move quickly to Violet's iPad. Violet?
Hi there. Oh, my name's Leo, by the way, not Violet, but this is my mum's iPad. But I just wanted to ask a question about, like the kind of the role of religion in society that you mentioned. And yeah, like I guess, there's like a lot of things going on in the world right now with, racial prejudice, and there's still in many aspects of our society, men and women are unequal. So I was wondering, like, from a Baha'i perspective, how can anyone sort of, as in the Baha'i faith, encourage us to, like, how can we champion justice in a way in our day-to-day lives, like sort of with these principles of eliminating racial prejudice and encouraging equality of men and women. How can we do that without perhaps becoming sort of overly political in the way? Because of course there's like so many different sources of information on like social media as well. And yeah, how, I guess, can we sort of approach it in a way that does not create further conflict? Thanks.
Well, that's a big subject, which the Baha'is, it's very contemporary, as we're all having to, within the range of Baha'u'llah's teachings, within the explanations of the Master and the Guardian and the guidance of the House of Justice, we have to not enter into the political fray and the gender fight and all the other things that are going on at the present time. We can state our basic teachings and principles and understanding, and in a gentle, loving manner, and with a kindly heart, so that it gets listened to. But this message of recognition of the oneness and wholeness of the human race solves all those problems, as we think of it, how all of its facets match up with the challenges we're having. Shoghi Effendi years ago, he wrote they did guides to lead people on a visit to the house of worship in Chicago, in Wilmette. And he said to them that they should be very careful never to mention political figures. Don't mention the name of them, don't mention parties. And if asked about these things, say that the Baha'is don't enter into political views because they feel that the solutions to the problems, and this is a key thing that the Baha'is, as Baha'is, we have to understand, the solutions are not national. Anything we do to fix the national political situations where we live is not the ultimate solution. It's a pay stuff job. It's a temporary something, and it'll get worse next year again, and then the following years, and it's going down the drain. Shoghi Effendi said that the world order is being rolled up, and that looks like humanity is going to burn itself down. And he said the new world order of Baha'u'llah will be built on the ashes of the old one. But we don't set the fires. That's the business of the other people, what they're doing and how they react, and the effects of the proclamation in a clear and clear way of the teachings of the faith in the public forums and so on. But he says that if they insist, well, how can you do that politically? How you just leave us all to go to rack and ruin? And so, no, we're promoting international principles. That our platform is international. It's supranational, above nation. It's a world community. It's a world fellowship. And it's a magnet which is attracting more and more people all over the world to it. So that this is, we have to be careful to not enter into the fray. There's a lot of things going on the internet, where Baha'is are expressing opinions that are inappropriate. Not because of meanness, but lack of understanding of Baha'u'llah's teachings. And this comes when we don't study as well as teach. Shoghi Effendi said the Baha'is need to study the faith and teach the faith. If we know the teachings, we have answers to just about anything people will ask.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. I want to interject here. Some people are asking about recordings. For those who didn't hear, this session is recorded, and I believe it's on the Zebby Whitehead Fireside website. So that information will be available to you. Someone will put it up in the chat. You can also, if you're accessing it through the YouTube channel, that's not Mr. Dunbar's personal channel, but he has given permission for it to be accessed there. So a couple of different ways you can access this fireside if you want to refer back to it. There's so much meat here, so many concepts that I'm sure you'll want to refer back to later as you're thinking about how you're going to plan your own study and interactions with other people. I believe we still have a couple people with questions. One of them was Saman.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, sorry. Just wanted to thank you all. Thank Mr. Dunbar for the wonderful speech that he gave. I have two questions. He already answered my questions, but the first one is like, how can we unite our communities? Like, any suggestions how we could unite our communities, and also any suggestions on effective ways of teaching, like any approaches that Mr. Dunbar would recommend. Thank you so much.
So I think, the question at the community level is that the Baha'i should be praying, and that we should remind each other of the teachings of unity and see if we can't overcome the differences. If there happens to be differences in the community, where there's unity in the community, it acts like a magnet. Then new people are attracted and come close to us and want to know what makes us so happy and all of that. That's very important, that we have a community that reflects the Baha'i spirit. But people come into the faith, not all of them come in a complete way, and they need to make their understanding, it grows in them and it develops in them. Some of them are maybe never catch fire, but they're being close to the Baha'is who are on fire. At least they warm up and stay warm. And there's a lot of challenges. The Baha'i faith is so big, it takes in all the different extremes of personalities. And they don't always get along together. It takes a while. there's, the scriptures say some people have been created as tests for others. I think we all have had that confirmed in our lives. You've asked about life after death, and we haven't gotten back to that.
Right.
I wanted to just say that Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha's teachings push the horizons and limitations of our understanding of those spiritual realms after death in ways that we've never seen before. So many explanations, and the conditions of the near ones and the conditions of those that have denied God. And all of these things are explained in Some Answered Questions, a book called Some Answered Questions of Abdu'l-Baha. You can see most of them summarized also in some writings of Baha'u'llah quoted in the Gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah. He explains about the condition of the soul after death. And it talks about how many stages there are that the soul moves through in the other worlds. And it's not just one world, it's an infinite line of eternal realms that we move through in the future. It says, don't lament that you haven't, if this world hasn't been happy for you. This is a world of sorrows, it's a world of darkness. But the next world is a world of light. And you move through various stages in it. Now, if you can bear to hear me out on something individual, which I think is implied in the Baha'i teachings, but it's not as clear as I'm trying to understand it. And that is, Baha'u'llah he's come to proclaim his faith to all who are in the heavens and on the earth. And he says this over and over again. And we have the vision of Enoch in the spiritual traditions, who went through the various heavens, talks about the various heavens. And we have the night journey of Muhammad, where he moves through the seven heavens. He comes in the one, and then he moves up the heavens. And he describes that each of the heavens has a manifestation, a prophet of God at the center of it, then his followers are circling around him. So this has to be, hundreds of years of followers, thousands of years of followers from the different religions. And if they're still in their own individual heavens in the next world, if Baha'u'llah is coming, has a big job uniting those heavens, the spiritual heavens of the different religions in the next world. So I think that this is something that's ongoing. And we have also his message. We see signs of it being delivered in the next world. Abdu'l-Baha says the ones who spread the message in the next world, they are referred to as diffusing the fragrances of God. And attracting the hearts to this message of oneness. So we see there's plenty to do in the next world. Remember in one of the tablets, Baha'u'llah says, whoever recites this will have a service in both this world and the world to come. So there's things for us to do in that world. It's a very active world. If you look at the references here and there, you see that the physical senses that we have here are outer manifestations of spiritual senses, that the spiritual senses are just as complete. And there's no reason to think whatever vehicle we have, spiritual vehicle we have in the next world, is going to lack in vision, in hearing, in fragrances, in taste, in eating, in enjoying communion and community with many other dear, precious souls. We'll meet up with our families and loved ones we've had. We'll see them there. We're assured of that. There seems to be a parallel of some of the things that people describe in their near-death experiences that are confirmed in the Baha'i writings. This review of your life and judgment based on what you've done with what you were given. all of these wonderful teachings, rich teachings. And there's a number of volumes published with the Baha'i teachings about life after death. And that is, the salvation is the question of recognition of the manifestation in your time. I wanted to go back and just say a few words, since I'd promised earlier to do that. The friendship with Zebi Whitehead was very precious, and he was so kind and poured out kindness and love for the teachings and the writings and service. In my case, I was young and so happy to have that, the guidance. And he spoke of his pilgrimage with such love. And I just have a few words how he describes coming into the room, the dining room where Shoghi Effendi was receiving the pilgrims when he was on pilgrimage. He said, we entered the room for the first time and looked at him. We could see in his face an expression that we'd never seen in any human being's face before. It was so filled with deep thoughts, with feeling and sensitivity of the finest kind. As he stood up and greeted us and asked us to come near to him and put our faces next to him, I could sense he was not just a spiritual person, but he represented the entire universe since the passing of his grandfather. I felt, of course, as if I were in the presence of the manifestation of God, which he was not, but he was the sign of God on earth. And the power that exuded from him was overwhelming. And yet at the same time, it made you completely happy to be in his presence and to listen to what he had to say. He was very informal. He spoke in a clipped Oxford accent. He spoke at first about the British believers and their progress in the faith at that particular time. He said the British had been exemplary in the way in which they'd pioneered, and he was very pleased with what they had done. Just the reports he's given, and I hope there's a recording. There must be a recording somewhere of Zebi talking about his pilgrimage. I spoke to other friends who said that had been in the presence of the guardian, and that Zebi, who was an actor, he was very sensitive to cadence and tone of voice. And that when he repeated in his pilgrimage report, when he would talk about his pilgrimage, he would imitate the guardian. I mean, he would absolutely match the cadence and tone in which the guardian spoke, and that accent that he had. And as an actor, he did that. And it said it made the people think they're right in the presence of Shoghi Effendi again. That was a blessing. And it's wonderful that you're keeping on the tradition of his firesides here.